So it's a nice winter day today. Nice blustery winds, the occasional snow squall, occasionally the sun will peek out, and yes, a balmy 17 degrees. It sounds like the perfect day to go for a hike in the woods. We might be able to learn something together. So come on, let's go.
From a mile away, there isn't much that you can do. They make a promise of a better day, but you know it's not true. It's just like I told you. I don't wanna hear it anymore. I feel like I've heard it all before. You know that I'm trying to leave it all behind. I'm trying to see my way to find peace of mind. Everybody's talking, but they got nothing to say. I just wanna turn around and run the other way. I don't wanna hear it, I just want a little peace of mind. Sometimes I think that I can hear them from a mile away. There isn't much that you can do. They make a promise of a better day, but you know it's not true. It's just like I told you. I don't wanna hear it anymore. I feel like I've heard it all before. You know that I'm trying to leave it all behind. I'm trying to see my way to find peace of mind. A little peace of mind. Just a little peace of mind.
You know, it was the great American poet Robert Frost who penned the poem, The Road Not Taken. And it's appropriate for today's walk. If you're not familiar with the poem, let me share the words with you. It's just 4 stanzas long. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Much like the poem from Robert Frost, the world that we live in right now often only gives us 2 options. You either get to go down this path or this path, but there's no other option. You know, whether it's political views, or whether you're a mask wearer or not a mask wearer, whether you think that the vaccine's a good thing or not a good thing, whether you think kids should be in school or not in school, there are lots of issues that give us only 2 options, and they tend to be extreme options. And could it be that there is not only a third, but maybe even a fourth and a fifth path that can be taken almost all the time? Don't get me wrong, there are times where an issue, according to God, is one way or the other. It's something we should engage in, or it's something that we shouldn't. But so often, nuance is required as we figure out how to navigate life. And there's a passage in Scripture that I believe speaks to this issue. And it shows us the foundational element necessary for us to be able to think on our feet in life and to make good, practical Christian decisions. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to the book of Joshua. Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Again, that's Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. This is the word of the Lord for us today. This is a stunning passage on many fronts. It's stunning because Joshua is preparing to go into Jericho, to enter the promised land. And God has already detailed, He's sanctioned this campaign. And He's told Joshua in chapter 1 of the book of Joshua that he's supposed to go into Jericho. And He gives him explicit commands as to how things are to be carried out. In chapter 2, Joshua sends spies into the land of Canaan, and through unconventional means utilizes the prostitute Rahab as a person who assists these spies in getting good information and escaping the city without harm. Then in chapters 3 and 4, we see that those carrying the Ark of the Covenant, that place where God dwelled amongst the people of Israel, are told to walk into the river, the Jordan River. And when they step into the water, at flood stage nonetheless, God parts the waters so that the entire Israelite nation can walk through without getting wet. And finally, in chapter 5, though it seems strange to our modern ears, the carrying out of the circumcision of all the males, that would be the generation following those adults that left Egypt, who hadn't already been circumcised. But remember, that's the mark of the people of Israel, that they were circumcised. They were different people. They were God's chosen people. That circumcision is carried out in chapter 5. And so Joshua, as the commander of Israel's army and as the leader, man, he is ready to go to battle. He's been called by God to do this. And so it seems quite natural for him to ask the question when he comes across a man with his sword drawn, "Are you for us or are you for the enemy?" And Joshua gets blown off his feet when the man replies, "I'm for neither. But as commander of the Lord's army, let me speak to you now." You might be asking, what's going on here? I mean, after all, God has actually told Joshua to go into the city of Jericho, to march around it, and to conquer those cities in the promised land, Jericho being one of the first. And technically, theologically speaking, what's going on here is what is called a theophany. That is, God showing up in personal form. In this passage, more specifically, I would argue that it's a Christophany, meaning it's actually Jesus that shows up prior to his walking as a human being on the face of the earth in his public earthly ministry recorded in the Gospels of the Bible. He shows up as the commander of the Lord's army. And what is the point of all of this? The point is that even when God has sanctioned something, when God has called us to do something, when God has provoked in our minds something that we're supposed to focus on and live out. It doesn't mean at any time that we can abandon him. We need to continue to look to him for our power. We need to look to him for our direction. We need to continue to make sure that we're walking in obedience with him. Just like his predecessor did, Moses, Joshua is called by this leader or commander of the Lord's army to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. God is there. So often in life, we see two practical paths in front of us. They're pragmatic in nature, and they're almost always derived from our own human instinct. And standing there right in front of us is often a path that's unseen until we slow down, spend time with God, and hear his voice continually. The third option, God always has a path, but we have to be in connection with God to be able to discern what that path is, even if we've already been given the foundational command to go.
Sometimes I think that I can hear them from a mile away. There isn't much that you can do. They make a promise of a better day, but you know it's not true. It's just like I told you. I don't wanna hear it anymore. I feel like I've heard it all before. You know that I'm trying to leave it all behind. I'm trying to see my way to find.
So the overarching theme here at the end of Joshua chapter 5 is that we always look to God first to figure out what he wants us to be about, what he wants us to abstain from, what he wants us to engage with wholeheartedly. But then we also need to engage with God continuously and continually. We need to check in with God all of the time to make sure that we're still on his path. This fleshes itself out in our lives in many practical ways. In marriage, our marriages can be started with the foundational principle that we're going to honor God in our relationship, that we've prayed about who we're going to marry. But that doesn't negate the fact that in the upcoming months and years and decades, we need to continuously ask God, how are you calling me to live in my relationship with my spouse? Husbands, how can you honor your wives? Wives, how can you love your husbands? What is God calling you together as a couple to be focused on for his eternal purposes? It may be the whole growing up process. Maybe as a young kid, you gave your life to Jesus Christ. You committed your life to him. You rely on him for your salvation. But as time goes on, you wander away, and we're called to be continuously pressing into God and to allow him to shape our lives. This happens when we choose what school we're going to go to for college or a career path. God may be behind us going to a certain place or engaging in a certain trade, but we're supposed to constantly, daily, ask God, what is it that you want for me? Shape me and mold me. Guide me down your perfect path. It happens in our twilight years as we head into retirement. We've saved up for this ability to slow down the pace of life. But what does it look like? As retired folks, it's so easy to not have a game plan, to just kind of have every day come at you. And God can do incredible things in retired people's lives. In fact, look at the Bible. So many people God used were in their twilight years, and God used them to work miracles. It happens in our engagement with God to worship Him. Maybe we grew up going to church and engaging with a church family to be in that relationship where we sing praise to God, where we spend time learning about God from His holy word, the Bible, to encourage one another and to hold each other accountable, and over time we drift away. And we're called to continue to press into each other and to God, to allow Him to shape us, to keep us on that path. It's also quite possible that you are going to church worship on Sunday mornings, but you aren't there mentally. You're thinking about all the things that you have to do. You're contemplating the little empire you're trying to build in your lifetime. And maybe God is calling us back to the path of worshiping God with all of our heart, our soul, our strength, and our mind, to love Him with all our being. And so could it be that part of the answer to the challenges that we face as a divided nation, as people who are often in conflict with one another, that we need a more nuanced approach, and that approach is always the approach of God. Not dressing up our ideas in godly garb as though God sanctions whatever we think is the proper view. Not pressing our views onto God, rather going to God and allowing Him to shape us and to mold us and to send us on the journey He's called us to live in life. Could it be that the greatest thing that we need as a people, as American people, today, is not supporting a conservative or a liberal agenda, not being pro this or pro that, not demanding our rights and what we wish life would be like, but honoring God, turning back to God? You've heard me say it many times, we as Americans often worship the God of convenience. Life is so easy so often for so many of us that we don't even realize we've neglected God almost completely. Let us turn back to God. May I plead with our nation, and may it begin with Christians and the church, that we would rely on God. Turn to the commander of the Lord's army to be empowered for direction and to lead us down the path we're called to live. God bless you as you fall on your knees before God and allow Him to humble you and serve Him. May it be so. Amen.